pretend to be my dad just for one day? Please!
He had it all: success, money, respect. But every night he dined alone, and every Tuesday at 3 o'clock sharp, he sat on the same bench in Retiro as if the world could be ordered by schedules. Hector Salvatierra, 38 years old, CEO of Salvatec, wore his suit like armor. Dark gray, perfect knot, discreet watch. The leather briefcase at his feet seemed more loyal than any person. That Tuesday in late autumn, the park smelled of wet earth and golden leaves. Hector unfolded his economic newspaper and pretended to be interested in the markets, but in reality, he was counting again the same thing. How many minutes were left to return to his silent apartment? How many hours he could fill with work to avoid hearing the echo of his own plate? Then he saw her. A girl stopped in front of him, thin as a thread, with wild blonde curls and worn-out shoes, too big for her feet. She wore a slightly oversized white dress and an old jacket that didn't fit her. She had the most serious look that Hector had seen on someone so small. She didn't approach asking for coins. She didn't extend her hand. She just looked at him, as if she had chosen him. "Excuse me," she finally said, her voice trembling. "Could you pretend to be my dad? Just for today?" Hector looked up with automatic irritation, not because of the girl, but because of the crack that phrase opened in his routine. "You shouldn't talk to strangers," he said curtly, looking for the easiest way out. The girl didn't move. "You're not a stranger," she replied firmly, as if repeating a rehearsed truth. "Every Tuesday at 3, you sit here. My mom and I saw you on the way to the hospital. She used to say, 'Look at that elegant gentleman. He seems like a good dad.'" The word mom fell like a stone in calm water. "Is your mother?" Hector asked, hating how soft his voice had become. "In the Gregorio Marañón hospital. She has cancer. The doctors say that." He swallowed, but did not cry. "That she doesn't have much time left. And the saddest thing for her is that I've never had a dad. I thought that if she saw me today with one by my side, even if it were made up, maybe she would leave a little more at peace." Hector felt a pang under his sternum, an absurd memory, his own childhood without hugs, without the sounds of home. His father working late, his mother always tired. He had promised not to need anyone, and he had kept that promise too well. The wind moved the leaves as if the park were breathing. A street musician played a slow habanera near the pond. Hector looked at the girl's hand, so small, and imagined for a second what it would be like for someone to depend on him. "What's your name?" he asked more softly. "Lucia. Lucia Martin." The surname sounded common, but the name left a strange echo in some closed room of his memory. Lucia extended her hand timidly, not as a demand, as a bridge. Hector hesitated. A part of him wanted to get up and disappear. Another, which he thought was dead, wanted to see if it was still capable of being present. "Where do I have to go?" he finally said. Lucia didn't smile. She just pressed her lips together, as if to prevent hope from escaping. "With me." They walked along the paths of Retiro. He with measured steps, she light, glancing at him as if fearing he might change his mind. Hector thought, "What the hell am I doing?" But deep inside, a small voice, sounding like something akin to conscience, replied, "At last you're doing something that doesn't cost you anything." They took a taxi. Lucia sat pressed against the window, playing with the zipper of a blue backpack. Hector watched the city pass behind the fogged glass, and for the first time in years, he didn't feel rushed. He felt fear, a strange, clean fear, the kind that means something matters. The Gregorio Marañón hospital smelled of disinfectant, machine coffee, and waiting. On the oncology floor, the hallways had pastel walls, as if the colors could soften the inevitable. Lucia greeted a nurse who returned a sad smile, as if she knew her too well. "Room 204, the girl murmured. In front of the door, Lucia squeezed Hector's hand. Mom gets happy when someone visits her, but she doesn't tell anyone. Hector swallowed hard, as if it were him who was about to be judged. The door opened with a slight creak. Clara was sitting on the bed, her face pale, her eyes sunken, a colorful scarf covering her head. Even so, her smile lit up the room like a lamp turned on in a tunnel. "Hello, my love," she whispered upon seeing Lucia. Lucia stepped forward, and with a confidence that seemed borrowed from necessity said, "Mom, he is my dad." Hector was left breathless. Dad. The word hit him in the chest like a bell. Clara looked at Hector, not with surprise or reproach, with gratitude. "Nice to meet you," she said, extending her hand. "Thank you for coming." Hector took it. Clara's skin was thin, warm, and her gaze held something that Hector could not name, a subtle recognition, as if she had seen him in another time. Lucia pulled out a drawing from her backpack. She unfolded it carefully, as if it were sacred, 3 figures under a rainbow, holding hands. "It's you, me, and Dad," Lucia said. Clara held the paper like someone holding a fragile miracle. Her eyes became moist. "How precious," she whispered. The conversation became strangely natural. They talked about school, a nice teacher, the hospital soup, the musician in the park. Hector responded with short, awkward phrases, like a man who has forgotten the language of intimacy. Clara, however, helped him with kind silences. When Lucia went to the bathroom with the nurse, Clara leaned back and looked at Hector calmly. "I don't know who you are," she said softly, "but today you have made my daughter happier than anyone in years." Hector wanted to say something witty, something appropriate. He couldn't. He just nodded. Clara added, almost as if she were speaking to herself, "You look a lot like someone I met a long time ago." Hector felt a shiver, as if the past, which he believed was buried under numbers and promotions, had stirred. And then, for the first time, Hector understood that the "just for today" was not a small favor. It was a door. The night fell over Madrid with a deceptive softness. From the window of room 204, the city lights flickered like tired stars. Lucia was sleeping on a nearby sofa, hugging a stuffed animal, her face relaxed for the first time in a long time. Clara was breathing with difficulty, but her eyes remained awake. Hector was still there. No one had asked him to stay. No one had held him back. And yet, he had stayed. Clara watched him in silence, as if weighing a truth. "Why did you stay?" she asked. Hector looked at her. He had 1,000 easy answers: upbringing, compassion, courtesy. None were the truth. "I don't know," he admitted. "Maybe because I find it hard to leave." Clara nodded, as if that phrase was enough for her. "Lucia," she began, her voice rough, "it's my life, everything I did right, and now I know I don't have much left." Hector felt his chest tighten. The word mucho seemed like a pious lie. Clara took a deep breath and continued slowly, like someone placing pieces on the table. 6 years ago, I worked as an intern at a tech company in Salamanca, Salvatech. The name hit Hector like a punch that opens the eyes. "You were at Salvatech?" he repeated, incredulous. "In the interface team. A few months. We saw each other a couple of times." Clara looked down. "One night, after a presentation, we stayed late in the meeting room. You were tired. I was too. We talked about everything and nothing, and for a moment, I thought the world could be different." Hector felt the ground tilt. He remembered a face, a brief laugh, a conversation about maps and coffee. He remembered how he had left at dawn without promises, because he didn't make promises. Clara tightened the sheet with her hand. Lucia was born 9 months later. The silence that followed was not silence. It was an internal collapse. Hector looked at the sleeping girl. The blonde curls, the eyes, the exact way she frowned when she didn't like something, just like him. The phrase, "You are not a stranger," rewrote itself in his head with perfect cruelty. "Why didn't you tell me?" he managed to say, with his voice barely holding together. Clara showed no resentment, just exhaustion and dignity. "I heard you say that you didn't want children, that families distracted the men who build empires, and I had already begged too much in my life. I wasn't going to beg for you." Hector closed his eyes. In his memory, he saw himself, young, arrogant, boasting of freedom as if it were a virtue. In that moment, he hated that man. "Lucia never knew your name," Clara added. "I only told her that her dad wasn't there, that he didn't want to stay. I never said who you were. I never wanted to tarnish you, or tarnish her with a war." Hector got up. He walked to the window. He rested his forehead against the cold glass. Below, Madrid continued to live. Taxis, laughter, lights, people who still believed that time is infinite. "I'm not asking you for anything," Clara said behind him. "Just don't leave her alone. When I'm no longer here, she needs something more than memories." Hector turned slowly. His eyes were wet, but his voice came out firm, as if he had finally found a decision that did not stem from calculation. "I won't leave her. I want to be her father, not for what I was, but for what she is." Clara exhaled as if she had been holding the world in. Hector approached the bed and took her hand. Clara smiled weakly. "You resemble her more than you imagine," she whispered, looking at Lucia. "She has your gaze and your stubbornness." Lucia moved on the sofa and murmured something in her sleep. Hector leaned closer, stroked her hair. The gesture was so natural that it hurt him, as if his body had always known what his mind denied. Clara squeezed his hand with a thread of strength. "Promise me something," she said, "whatever it is. Promise me you'll talk to him about me, that he will know he was loved, that he never thinks he was a burden." Hector leaned down and kissed Clara's forehead with clumsy tenderness. "I promise you." Dawn became slow. The heart monitor marked an increasingly tired rhythm. At 7, Lucia opened her eyes on the sofa and looked around. Her gaze searched for her mother first, as always, and then settled on Hector. He felt something inside bend. "Dad?" she whispered, as if testing the word. "Are you still here?" Hector nodded, unable to speak. Lucia got up, went to Clara's bed, and kissed her cheek. "I love you, Mom." Clara caressed her cheek with fragile fingers. "I love you too, my life," she murmured. "Go to school like you like. It makes me happy." Lucia, obedient, got dressed with the help of the nurse. Before leaving, she looked at Hector. "Are you coming later?" Hector bent down to her height. "I will be here when you come back." Lucia left. The hallway swallowed her voice. An hour later, Clara opened her eyes with effort. She looked at Hector as if she wanted to imprint him in her memory. "Thank you for staying," she whispered. Hector swallowed hard. "I have nowhere to go," he said, and he wasn't talking about the city. Clara smiled, a small, victorious smile. "Tell her." She was struggling for breath. "Tell her that Mom is waiting for her, among the stars." The beeping of the monitor became continuous. Hector remained still. He did not cry at that moment. He just closed his eyes, and in his chest, something broke with a sound that no one else heard. A man who had lived to control the inevitable had just discovered that life is not controlled. It is held, or it is lost. When Lucia returned from school, she found Hector sitting in the hallway, with swollen eyes and empty hands. "Mom?" she asked. Hector hugged her with a strength that trembled. "Mom went to heaven, little star." Lucia did not scream. She did not faint. She just stood still, as if the world had frozen. Then, in a minimal voice, she asked, "What happens now?" Hector looked at her. "Now, we go home. To ours." Lucia rested her head on his chest, and for the first time, Hector felt that fear, could transform into something like purpose. The funeral was small and sober at San Jerónimo el Real. No ostentatious flowers, no long speeches. Clara would not have wanted a spectacle. Lucia wore a black dress that was too big for her, thick tights, and a borrowed jacket. In her hands, she clutched the drawing of the rainbow, already wrinkled from her fingers. When the priest spoke of heaven, of rest, and of the promise of life beyond, Lucia turned to Hector. "Is Mom with the stars?" she asked. Hector bent down, took her hand, and answered in a voice that was a bridge. "Yes, little star, and she watches over us from there." After the burial, they walked through Retiro. It was a grey day, and the wind moved dry leaves along the path like letters without a destination. They passed by the usual bench. Hector sat down. Lucia did too, without asking for permission. She rested her head on his arm. "Are you really coming with me?" she whispered. "I'm not going to leave," Hector said, without negotiating the phrase. Lucia took a while to respond. Then, "Can you be my dad? Forever?" The word forever burned in his throat. Hector looked at the pond. The water trembled with the air. He understood that forever was not a guarantee. It was a decision that had to be made every day. "Forever," he replied. That same afternoon, Hector cancelled meetings, delegated calls, turned off his phone. His assistant, alarmed, wrote to him about investors and risks. Hector did not respond. At the Atocha station, he bought churros and placed them in Lucia's hand, like someone handing over a small amulet against pain. They boarded a train to Salamanca. 2 hours, 2 lives. Lucia looked at the fields through the window, as if confirming that the world was bigger than the hospital. Hector watched her in the reflection of the glass. At times, he saw Clara. At times, he saw himself. And in both, he saw a story he had not dared to live. Hector's apartment in Salamanca was immaculate, silent, minimalist. Nothing was superfluous because nothing stayed. But that night, when Lucia walked through the door, she let out a wow so small that Hector's heart shrank. "It smells like nothing," she said, confused. "It's clean," he tried. "Mom used to say that homes filled with love smell like food," Lucia declared, as if it were law. The next day, the house began to smell like life, not by magic, by disaster. Lucia opened drawers, took out glasses, stuck a sticker on the fridge, left her backpack on the sofa, and accidentally spilled milk on the carpet. "Sorry," she said immediately, like someone expecting punishment. Hector bent down, took a cloth and cleaned up. "It's nothing." Lucia looked at him as if she didn't understand that answer. "Aren't you angry?" Hector stood still. It was true. He would have been angry before. Now, surprisingly, he only felt relief at having something real to clean. "I'm learning," he said. That was the word that saved them for months. Learning. He learned to make breakfast that wasn't black coffee. He learned that a girl takes time to put on her shoes because she is thinking. He learned that silence is not always peace. Sometimes it is fear. Lucia learned that the refrigerator fills up again, that the door opens when you knock, that an adult can come back after saying goodbye. There were difficult nights. Lucia would wake up startled, calling for Clara. Hector would go to her room with his eyes still glued shut and sit by her side. "Are you going to die too?" she asked one early morning, straightforwardly. Hector felt a punch in the stomach. Childhood does not embellish fear. "I don't plan to leave," he said, and then added what he could truly promise. "And if someday life takes me away first, I will leave you protected. It's already been discussed. It's already been written. But today, I am here. Tomorrow too." Lucia watched him with red eyes, and for the first time, hugged him without asking for permission. At school, at first, it was strange. Hector didn't know how to talk to teachers. He introduced himself as if signing contracts. "I am Hector Salvatierra, legal guardian of Lucia." The teacher looked at him with a kind gesture. Here we don't need titles. We need presence. That phrase haunted him. Lucia, for her part, defended herself as best as she could. If a child asked, "And your mother?" she would respond with an adult calm. "She is in heaven, and my dad is here." Sometimes on the same Tuesday they baked cookies. It wasn't an ancient tradition. It was an accident. Hector tried to cook a potato omelette, flipped it wrong, and decorated the floor. Lucia laughed so much that she fell off the chair. "I think Mom did it better," he said, laughing. "Sure," he admitted. "Then let's do what Mom did when something went wrong." "What?" "Cookies." They found a handwritten recipe by Clara, folded inside a notebook. Lucia read it aloud, proudly, as if she were invoking her mother with each ingredient. Some cookies came out hard as rocks, others too soft, but there were never any leftovers. One day, the teacher gave Hector a folded sheet. Lucia wrote this. "I think you should read it." That night, when the girl was sleeping, Hector turned on the living room lamp and opened the sheet. Twisted letters, crossed out words, a sincerity that didn't ask for permission. "My hero is called Dad. He came when I needed him the most. He didn't come flying. He just came. And that was enough." Hector placed the sheet on the table. He rubbed his eyes. The apartment was messy, cups, pencils, a blanket on the floor. And for the first time, that didn't give him anxiety. It gave him peace. The phone vibrated with a work call. Hector looked at the screen for a few seconds and turned off the phone. He went to the door of Lucia's room and watched her sleep. On the nightstand, there was a photo of Clara smiling and a small, unlit candle. Hector whispered, almost without a voice, "Thank you, little one, for choosing me." And in the silence, as if in response, the floor stopped being a place. It began to be a home. 5 years later, the Salvatec headquarters in Salamanca was still as modern and tidy as ever. But Hector's office no longer smelled of new leather or strong coffee. Now it smelled of school glue, colored pencils, and, some Tuesdays, freshly baked cookies. On the glass table rested financial reports alongside a blue-covered notebook where Lucia pasted paper stars and wrote phrases that came from her heart. On a binder, framed, there was a drawing repeated 1,000 times with variations. A girl and a man holding hands, and a woman in the sky surrounded by shining dots. That picture, which would have previously seemed unprofessional, had become the most important piece in the office. It was the reminder that everything else was secondary. "Dad!" shouted Lucia, bursting in like a comet, already 10 years old, with a sheet held high. "I got a 10 in science." Hector looked up and his face lit up without permission, as if someone had turned on a light from within. "That deserves a celebration. Tell me about it." Lucia showed him the work, a research project on stars and constellations. In the corner, she had drawn a cloud in the shape of a heart. "Did you know that when a star dies, its light continues to travel through the universe for thousands of years?" she said seriously, touching her chest. "Even though it no longer exists, its brightness is still here." Hector swallowed hard. He looked at her carefully, trying not to break that calm. "Like, Mom?" he asked, surprised to hear himself. Lucia nodded without pain, with a mature tenderness. "Yes. The teacher says that when we love someone who is no longer here, that love doesn't go away. It stays." Hector stood up and hugged her tightly. For a moment he remembered the girl who trembled on the bench at Retiro, asking him for a lie to make her mother happy. And he realized that that lie had ended up teaching him the truth. That afternoon, instead of going back to work, he took her out for a snack. Not to an elegant place, but to a small cafe where the waiters already knew her. "Do you know what scares me the most?" Lucia asked as she dipped a cookie in hot milk. Hector tensed. "Tell me." "That other children feel the same as I felt. When Mom was sick, I looked at the hospital corridors and thought that if I behaved well, maybe someone would stay with me. Lucia lifted her gaze. Dad, can we help more children? Hector felt a mix of pride and guilt. Pride for her heart, guilt for everything he had ignored for years. Yes, he replied, we can, and we are going to do it seriously. That decision did not come from a PR campaign. It was born from sleepless nights, crumpled drawings, from a forever that repeated every morning when taking her to school. Hector created a program from the company, scholarships, psychological support, tutors, foster homes with real follow-up. It was not charity to feel better, it was reparation. Months later, Lucia spoke at a small event at a public school. She was shaking a little, but her voice came out clear. You don't need to be born lucky to deserve love, she said. Sometimes you just need someone to stay. Hector watched her from the last row with wet eyes. He thought of Clara. He thought of his promise, and he knew he was fulfilling it. That night, like every night for years, they lit a candle next to Clara's photo. Lucia watched the dancing flame. Thank you, Mom, she whispered, for giving me the best dad in the world. Hector stayed at the door, with his heart full and tired in the best way. He approached the photo and touched the frame with the tips of his fingers. Thank you, Clara, he said softly, for not giving up when I was a wall, and for bringing me back to myself. Lucia curled up between the sheets, and Hector sat by her side until he saw her sleep. Outside, the sky was clear. The stars seemed closer. Hector thought of that Tuesday in Retiro, of the phrase that broke him, "Could you pretend to be my dad? Just for today." He understood the irony. What started as a play ended up being the greatest truth of his life. Because family is not always born. Sometimes it is found. Sometimes it arrives late. Sometimes it is built with patience, with apologies, with presence, with someone who stays when there are no more applause or reasons. Hector was not Lucia's first hug. He was not the one who sang to her as a baby. He was not the one who was there at the early birthdays, but he was the one who took responsibility when life showed him the price of his absence. He was the one who decided, day after day, to be home. And perhaps that is the hardest and most beautiful lesson. It doesn't matter how far you have been. There is always a way back if you have the courage to walk it with an open soul. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to think, who can you stay with today? Whom do you owe a call, an apology, a real presence? Share this story. Perhaps in some corner there is another little star believing that it only needs a father for a day, not knowing that this day can change everything forever.